Hello, we're back looking at Chapter 4, Activity-Based Costing and Cost Management. In plainer language, in accounting, this is basically a topic that covers what is referred to as cost allocation. Oftentimes in business settings, you may have a number of related companies, or you may have several departments, or maybe even several products within a company which would require the allocation of costs that are originating for one reason or another in a central point of some sort. And to more accurately reflect costs, again, either on a company basis or a departmental basis or on a product basis. And those are just examples. There may be other scenarios that would require cost allocation. But in order to more accurately reflect cost, you would allocate costs, again, or divide it up, distribute the costs that are originating from a central point. You would distribute it or divide it up or assign it or allocate it to the various entities or revenue centers, or could be as simple as products that are involved. So anyway, I think if we go through the problem, it might be a little bit easier to understand how this works. So we're looking at problem PA4-3, which is the second problem assigned in Chapter 4. And Chapter 4 is not due this Sunday. It's actually due the following Sunday. But I had a request from a student. Actually, I had a few questions on this problem. So I thought I would just try to cover it in a video, an instructional video. So here we go. Okay, problem PA4-3, selecting cost drivers. Assigning costs using activity rates. Harbor Company makes two models of electronic tablets, the home tablet and the work tablet. Basic production information follows. So for each of the two products, home and work, we have direct materials, cost per unit 38 and 65, direct labor, cost per unit 20 and 36. Sales price per unit. Now this is not a cost item, obviously. This is the selling price. This would be a revenue item. So the sales price per unit is $366 for home and $582 for work. And then the expected production for each product per month. For home it's 730 units a month. For work, it's 340 units per month. Now, additional information. Harbor Company has monthly overhead of $181,810, which is divided into the following cost pools. So the overhead, which is actually one item that is usually required to be allocated, is further divided up into cost pools, and that's a characteristic of activity-based costing, or ABC costing. So the Harbor's overhead is divided up into the following cost pools. So there are setup costs, $79,800. Quality control costs, $61,410, and maintenance costs, $40,600, And so again, if we add the three cost pool totals up, that gives us our total overhead, which is $181,810. And then finally, the company has also compiled the following information about the chosen cost drivers. So we have number of setups. So setup, the number of setups will be the cost driver for allocating the setup costs. So the number of setups for home is 37, work is 58, total 95. For quality control costs, the cost driver used to allocate that cost is going to be the number of inspections. Inspections generally related to quality control. So we have 310 inspections for home, 380 inspections for work, total 690. And then finally, for the maintenance cost pool, the cost driver to allocate that overhead cost is going to be the number of machine hours used for each of the two products. So for home, the home tablet, the number of machine hours used is 1,600. And for the work tablet, the number of machine hours used is 1,300, total 2,900. It may help to refer to the text material to get a better understanding of how cost drivers function in this type of allocation system. So if we took a look at page 150 in chapter 4, step 1, and this is under review of volume-based cost systems. Step 1 is to determine the cost driver. So it says, remember that indirect costs are those that cannot be traced to specific products or services. So in this case, the indirect cost is our overhead cost. So our overhead cannot be easily traced to specific products. In our case, or it could be services, or that are not worth the effort to trace. Instead, they must be allocated based on some observable measure, and that observable measure is referred to as a cost driver. And so again, our cost drivers for allocation purposes, to allocate our setup, these are our overhead costs. We have setup costs, quality control costs, maintenance costs, and our cost drivers for each of the three cost pools are number of setups for setup costs, number of inspections for quality control costs, number of machine hours for maintenance costs. Okay, so what I've done here is set up a simple Excel spreadsheet to reflect this basic information presented in the problem. So this is just copying the information from the problem onto the Excel spreadsheet, make it a little bit easier to work with, because we'll have to do our calculations in solving for these various allocations required in the problem. Up here we have the direct material costs, direct labor costs per product and in total, sales price per unit, per unit, per product and in total, expected production. This is in units, should probably show that here. And then the overhead cost per month is $181,810 in total, and it's comprised of cost pools. Maybe I ought to show that as well. Oops. Here we go. Cost pools are setup, quality control, and maintenance for a total of 181,810. And then finally the cost driver statistics for each of the two products, number of setups, number of inspections, and number of machine hours. Okay, so let's get on with problem requirements. Requirement 1. Suppose Harbor uses a traditional costing system. And let's say that machine hours is the cost driver. Determine the amount of overhead assigned to each product line under this assumption. And so I'll just bring this spreadsheet over, and it says, let's see, requirement 1, and so this assumes a traditional costing system with machine hours as the cost driver. So I'm just going to copy this over. Machine hours. Bring that heading over. Okay. And let's see. So if we do an allocation based on machine hours, the total machine hours for each of the two products would be the numerator, and our denominator would be our total machine hours, which would be 2,900. And we'll show it in total as well. And so our allocation percentages, which will be, let's call this A and B. So this will be A divided by B. So plus divide by, and let's make that a constant. Okay, and then we want to turn that into a percentage. So we want to format that cell as a percentage. Two places should work. And I believe I got that set up so that it'll copy over. Okay. So this is basically 1,600 divided by 2,900. This is 1,300 divided by 2,900. And of course, the total would be 2,900 divided by 2,900. So 55% of overhead, 181,810, would be allocated to home. 44% of 181,10 would be allocated to work. Okay, so our overhead costs, and we'll just bring that over. And our allocated overhead based on machine hours then would be overhead times 55.17%, and let's show that for 100% as well. And let's cut this off with a better format. Currency, to place. Okay. So 100,308.97 and 81,501.03, and the two added together, and we should probably show that total just to double check it. Okay, so let's put those amounts into the problem. 100, 308.97. Now, notice the problem says do not round intermediate calculations and round your final answer to the nearest whole dollar. So what we're doing here is actually we rounded these percentages. But I believe Excel keeps the decimal in place and will show you a rounded amount while retaining the floating decimal. So these answers here should work, but it says round your answer to the nearest whole dollar. So this would be 100,309 for home, and 81,501 for work, and of course our total is calculated automatically 181,810, and just as we normally do, we want to check and see that we're okay on it, and we are okay. Okay, so that's using more of a traditional cost allocation process where you use one cost driver, and in this example that cost driver happens to be number of machine hours to allocate all of the overhead costs to the two products. So we can see what it comes out to. And then what we can do when we get through some of these other calculations is compare the allocation methods in terms of the number of costs allocated to each of the two products. And we can see how they differ. Okay, in requirement 2, we need to calculate the production cost per unit for each of Harbor's products under a traditional costing system. So we want to come up with a unit cost for each of the two products, home tablet, work tablet, and we probably need to refer back to previous chapters, remembering that our unit cost for product is comprised of direct materials, direct labor, and allocated overhead. And for requirement 2, our allocated overhead has just been calculated in requirement 1. So we'll use these two totals for our overhead amounts to get our unit cost. So let's show that on the worksheet. Requirement 2, and our direct materials per unit And direct labor per unit, I believe that was given to us in the problem. And so we have direct material cost per unit is this line. And our direct labor is this line. Now for overhead, we have allocated overhead for each of the two product lines, and we need to reduce that to a per unit amount. And so the way we would probably want to do that is to use expected production per month in units for each of the two product lines. So let's bring that down here. And our allocated overhead we'll use as a, whoops, that didn't work. Copy, paste values, okay. And let's take this off, okay. And let's unbold it. And so our unit overhead based on expected production per month. So this would be the total overhead divided by units, and let's reduce that to 2 decimals. And I think we can copy this over, and let's check the calculation. And why is that not coming out? That's not a valid check on that calculation. This would actually have to be a weighted average. So this is not a calculation that we want to do. Let's see. If we use the amount of overhead per unit calculated, and just get a total here. Okay. Actually, this is not valid, so I'm just going to take that out. And let's see what happens when we put these numbers in there. So, and what are the requirements here? It says round your intermediate calculations and final answers to 2 decimal places. Okay, well, let's see if we did this right. So home would be 137.41 per unit, and work would be 239.71 per unit. And as we always do, let's check it, and hopefully we are okay, and we're not, and so we need to go back and check that out. Okay, so I see what I am doing wrong here. I'm using the overhead unit cost instead of the total. I use these two amounts instead of getting a total here. So let's put that in. Total cost per unit. Let's move this down. Oops. Let's move this down one row. Okay. And so let's get these totals here. Okay. Now we should be all right. And let's do a double check calculation here. Okay, so these are our totals that we want to put in here. 195.41 and 340.71. Oops. 340.71, and let's do a check my work and see if we're okay. Okay, now we're all right. Okay, so again, I had used the overhead per unit cost. I had used these two amounts when I needed to use the total unit cost here, 195.41 and 340.71. Okay, so we got requirements 1 and 2 done. All right, now for requirement 3, we need to calculate Harbor's gross margin per unit for each product under the traditional costing system. So again, we're still using the information that we developed in requirements 1 and 2 above. And so for gross margin, we need to incorporate the sales price per unit. We need to start with sales price per unit, and then we would subtract our unit cost for each of the two products. So why don't we add that to our Excel spreadsheet. Requirement 3, and let's get our sales price per unit. And deduct our total cost per unit. Whoops, those numbers changed because they are formulas. So let's do a value, copy value, paste value. Okay. And the difference between the two would be the gross margin per unit. So we take the sales and subtract the cost. And let's do a check total there. We're okay. Oops. Let's get the line at the top there. Okay. We should probably use that same one for that. And we should probably use this heading for requirement 2 as well as requirement 3. Okay. And let's put in those numbers and see if that'll work. 170, 59. Hopefully our rounding is okay. And 241.29. And let's check that. And we're okay there. Okay. Now, requirement 4. Select the appropriate cost driver for each cost pool and calculate the activity rates if Harbor wanted to implement an ABC system. Okay, so now we're leaving a traditional system, and our example in the traditional system was using machine hours as an allocation base or cost driver. So in requirement 4, it is asking us for the cost driver and then the activity rate. Activity rate. Okay. So for setup costs, cost driver is the number of setups. For quality control, cost driver is the number of inspections. And for maintenance, cost driver is machine hours. So let's see. Activity rates. Activity rates. Okay, so to get the activity rate for each of those cost drivers, then we would take the dollar amount of the cost in that cost pool. No, I take it back. I take it back. To get the activity rate for the cost driver, we would take the amount of each respective driver for each of the two products and divide by the total. So for instance, for setups, let's put this on our spreadsheet here. Oops, I didn't want to do that. There we go. Let's see. Okay, requirement 4. So if we let's see, we need our cost drivers. And our cost drivers, well, first of all, we need our cost pools. Cost pools. So, cost pool, cost driver. Okay. And so we have setup costs and number of setups. Then we have quality control costs and number of inspections and maintenance costs and number of machine hours. Okay, let's try that. So let's see. What's going to be an easier way to do this? Let's see. We got home and work, and we got setup costs. Number of setups over total, 37 over 95. I think we need to open up some space here. Okay. So we got 37 and 58. And inspections were 310 and 380. And machine hours were 16 and 13. And let's put a total here. We could have just copied this over, it would have been easier here. Then we got a total. Copy that down. Okay. Now to get our activity rates, so let's put that in here. Activity rate for setup costs, so we would take home, divide by the total, and we would let's make that a constant so that we can let's format that as a percentage. I believe they want a percentage. They want a rate. And 61, and that should be 100. And to double check, we're at 100. So let's open this up here and say activity rate for quality control costs, and see. We got make that a constant. Okay, and change that to a percentage. And get a control total. Okay. And open up one more row here. And activity rate for maintenance costs. So we got plus 16 divided by the total. Let's make that a constant so we can copy it. F4. Change that to a percentage. Copy it over and get a control total. Okay, so these should be our activity rates for setup costs, for activity rates. Activity rates. I might have done the wrong calculations here. I need to check this out. Okay, so I checked into my calculations here, and actually I was a step ahead with my calculations. I calculated the activity rates per product, and actually for requirement 4 we need to do the activity rates in total. So I am going to insert some rows here. Requirement 4. And look at each of the cost pools and cost drivers, related cost drivers. And we're not doing this per product, we're doing it in total. So let's show our total here. So our setup costs are $79,800. And our quality control costs are $61,410, and our maintenance costs are 40,600. Let's put a total on that. And our, let's just call this TC, total cost. And then our activity totals. Why don't we show this up here? Activity totals would be these amounts. So our setups for home is 37, our setups for work is 58, but the total setups would be 95, and that's the number we need for this calculation. 95, and for inspections 690, and for machine hours 2900. Okay. And we don't need a total here because these three are separate and distinct. And so this is basically our answer for the second part of requirement 4. The activity rate for setups is 95, and the activity rate for inspections is 690. I don't know why they have dollars there though. Well, let's see how this works out. The activity rate for machine hours is 2,900. I'm not sure why the dollar signs are showing up. Let's see if this is going to work. What I did do is complete the other calculation I was doing, which was basically part of requirement 5. So the activity rate for setup costs for home and work, 37 over 95, 58 over 95. And if we multiplied the amount of setup costs by each of those two rates, we would get 31,080 for setup costs for home, and 61% of 79.8 is 48,720 for setup costs for work. And I did that for each of the three cost pools for the two products. So this is actually part of requirement 5, 31,080, 27,590, 22,4, and overhead costs assigned to work tablet is 48,720, 33,820, and 18,2. Okay, so let's see if these three numbers are going to work for us, since they show dollar signs on that worksheet, but those are not dollars. There. And that's not working out. I'm going to have to dig into this further. I'll be back. Okay, so I forgot I was cutting my calculations short one step. So the activity total for each of the three cost pools are 95 setup, 690 inspections, and 2,900 machine hours, which are the numbers I'd used here. But then to get the rate, I would take the total cost in each cost pool and divide it by the total number of activities for that cost pool. So for setups, excuse me, for setup costs, 79.8 divided by 95 is 840 per setup in total. Quality control costs of 61,410 divided by 690 inspections is $89 per inspection in total. And for maintenance costs, 40,600 divided by 2,900 machine hours is $14 per machine hour in total. And these three amounts are what go here. So this should be 840. This was inspections. This should be 89. And the third amount should be 14. Okay. So let's see if we are okay here. So requirement 4 and requirement 5 and requirement 4 and requirement 5. Okay, let's get this out of here and get our check my work. And let's see, requirement 4 we're okay, and requirement 5 we're okay. So we're okay through requirement 5. And now we need 6, 7, and 8. So let's see if we can get those done. Okay, so let's see if we can get this problem wrapped up. We got 3 more requirements to complete. We started out with requirements 1, 2, and 3 using a traditional costing system, working with the total overhead and one allocation base or cost driver, that being machine hours. And then in requirements 4 and 5 we switched to ABC costing using our cost pools: setup costs, quality control costs, maintenance costs, and the respective cost drivers for each of the cost pools, those being number of setups for setup costs, number of inspections for quality control costs, number of machine hours for maintenance costs. And essentially what this does is give you a more accurate allocation for your common costs, or in this case the overhead costs. And so I think when we take a look at requirement 6, we should be able to get a better idea as to exactly what I mean when I say get a better allocation. So let's take a look at 6. And in 6 they're asking for unit costs for each of the two products, home tablet, work tablet, but instead of unit costs based on a traditional costing system like we did in requirement 2, this is unit costs based on ABC costing. So in requirement 2 we used our overhead allocation based on machine hours, whereas in requirement 6 we're going to use our overhead allocations based on cost pools and cost drivers. Okay, so let's see if we can set that up here. I believe the first part is going to remain the same. Direct materials, direct labor won't change. So we got our direct materials per unit, direct labor per unit, and the final cost amount will be for overhead per unit. And so let's see, using the information that we came up in requirement 5. Requirement 5, we had overhead assigned to home 81070 and overhead assigned to work 10740. So that came from our worksheet here. And we divide those totals by our expected production, which amounts were given. So I'm going to add overhead cost to this here. And I'm going to bring this down here, base values, and let's see what we did in 2. Here we go. Allocated overhead based on machine hours. So this would be allocated overhead based on A, B, C. Okay. And our denominator is expected production per month. And what do we want to call that? Unit overhead based on expected production per month. So we'll take our allocated overhead and divide by expected production and format that as currency, 2 places, and we should be able to move that over there and plug those two in here, and we use values. Overhead per unit, and so this should be total unit cost under ABC formatting is off here. Let's format that as currency. There we go. And get a control total here. There we go. So our unit cost under ABC is $169.05 for home, and $397.29 for work, and that compares to $195.41 and $340.71. So we have more of our overhead allocated to work than home under ABC. And I think if we were to spend the time to analyze the distribution of overhead costs between setups, quality control, setup costs, quality control costs, and maintenance costs, we would be able to get a better understanding as to why the unit cost for overhead, the unit cost changes for the amount of overhead allocated under traditional versus ABC. But let's not forget to check and make sure that we're okay. And we're okay on that one. Gross margin is going to be very similar to what we did in 3, where we take our selling price. So this is going to be requirement 7. Take our selling price and compare it to our total cost per unit, but this time under ABC, and so our gross margin why isn't this total correct? There we go. Okay, so our gross margin is under ABC is 196.95 and 184.71. Oops, 196.95. Entered that in the wrong amount there, and 184.71. And let's do a quick check on that. So those two are correct. And then in 8, we compare what we showed in 170.59 to what we just did up above in number 7, 196.95 and 241.29 under traditional for work, and 184.71 under ABC for work. Let's check that we are correct. We are correct. And so basically the cost allocation system or method used between traditional and ABC affects the amounts of allocated overhead cost to each of the two products. This is an example of how using one method versus another makes a difference. So if the cost changes, assuming the same selling price under both scenarios, if cost changes, it's going to affect gross margin, and gross margin is going to affect net income. Net income will affect your financial statements. If you're taking them to the bank, it's going to have one effect on what the bank views as your operational results, and of course when you do your tax return, it's also going to have an effect on the amount of taxes that your company will be paying based on the amount of profitability reflected on your tax return. So bottom line is, it makes a difference. And of course, what's important from a managerial perspective, keeping in mind that Accounting 202 is management accounting or managerial accounting. Management needs to and wants to work with the best figures, the best numbers, the most accurate numbers. And so in this case, when it comes to cost allocation, it's generally considered that it's generally felt that ABC costing gives a more accurate amount for cost allocation than traditional costing, where only one cost driver is applied to total overhead or total cost to be allocated, as opposed to the problem that we just did as an example, showing 3 different cost pools and 3 different cost drivers, one for each of the 3 cost pools. So you get a refinement in the allocation process and a more accurate information on your books and records. Okay, hopefully this helps. If you have any questions about this problem, let me know, and I'll try to work with you further and help you get through it. Sorry this took so long. It's kind of late right now, and after a long day I feel kind of tired, so that's probably reflected in the my volume and the low energy that I'm showing on this video, but hopefully it makes sense and you can use it. Great. And I'll be back soon with more later. Thanks a lot. Have a great one. Aloha.